Christians produce backsliders. Here's how. You're asking, how is that possible for Christians to produce other backsliders? Well, as we all know, a backslider is someone who had stopped having anything to do with God, or if they just up and turned their back on God, or if they just slowly fell away from God. They stopped staying in the Word of God, like reading, studying, meditating on the Word of God. They stopped praying, they stopped worshiping, they stopped going to church. Overall, they stopped having anything to do with God over a period of time, and eventually fell back into sin, and may have become worse than what they were before they ever became Christians. But a good percentage of backsliders, they didn't fall away from God on their own, like overall just stopped having anything to do with God, like some backsliders. A lot of backsliders, they fell away from God because of other Christians. How is that possible? Well, because due to certain situations and bad circumstances, and maybe even trial and tribulation, some of these Christians that can produce a backslider, they could they'll end up saying stuff to somebody in a way that'll just cause them a lot of discouragement, and it can really they'll say something to them in a way that can just really mess them up psychologically and spiritually, and then they just right there and then they just they'll feel like their whole walk with God was in vain, and they're caused serious discouragement, and they can either right there at that moment just up and just totally throw their hands up in the air, just turn their back on God, or they just because of that discouragement and feeling like their whole walk with God was in vain, they just stop having anything to do with God, and they just stop everything, and then sadly, possibly within a year, not only do they go back to being unsaved all over again, but they're indulged in a life in sin all over again, and it's possible that they can end up becoming worse, or a lot worse than what they were before they became Christians. And it says all that in the Word of God. And let me add this as a bonus. There's many God's people out there that think that once saved, always saved. That's not true. It's not in the Bible. Of course, they're going to have scriptures that prove it, to back it up. Well, if anybody believes that once saved, always saved, take it up with God. He'll tell you how dead wrong you are. Because the Bible does say that there's scriptures in the Bible that does say about people who used to be, it talks about a person who was once saved can actually turn their back on God. Well, who backslid. Sorry, I felt that coming up. We'll not cut that out. It says that they have to start all over again, but God will heal their relationship. And that's all to say. Most of these videos I make, I just talk the top off my head. Sometimes I read it from a screen after typing something up, unless if I'm reading from something else that somebody typed, or I just try to explain off what off the top of my head. And so there you have it.